Hi friends, welcome back to Faith Unraveled. We're right in the middle of our Faith Deconstruction series, and today we have an episode for you entitled The Rescue. This is a very special episode. We're going to dive into some of the modalities that we use to help retrieve ourselves, to help rebuild our identity. This was a really difficult process. It was very different for Jamie and I, and we used different tools, different modalities. We're going to talk about what some of those were. But before we dive in, why do you think this topic is important for people who are deconstructing?
I think it's very important because as you deconstruct, you get to, and it's not for, I don't think everyone encounters this, but definitely a good number of people encounter losing their identity. And as part of that process of losing yourself, you have to figure out who you are in that. And then you have to understand, how do you rebuild yourself with new value systems, with a new structure.
And sometimes I wonder if that feeling of like a loss of identity is more pronounced for people who were really devout. I kind of wonder for people that the church never really worked.
Yeah.
Do they experience the same kind of identity crisis? I would love to hear from people who maybe the church didn't work for you and you were always kind of like labeled like a Jack Mormon and you deconstructed. Maybe it was kind of a relief for you, or are you also having an experience of having to rebuild your identity?
I would think they would see it a bit different. If their identity wasn't attached to the church,
right?
I think they wouldn't necessarily lose an identity. They might lose community, their friends. They would probably lose family members. So I do think there is a loss that they have to still rescue and regain. I think this process, I'd be very surprised that there's no rescue at all.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. So the way that I would best describe the rescue, if this sounds like a weird theme, the idea here is that you're intentionally rebuilding your identity. And for some people, they just don't know who they are. They're kind of like, what happened to me after a faith crisis? Part of this process is waking up and just realizing that you were in the box. The next step is kind of just realizing like what happened to you. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you kind of go through this phase where you are identifying the ways that the church harmed you. Just today, I saw a meme pop up and I shared it on my Instagram, and it's a picture of a temple with a random dude sitting on a bench outside of the temple. And it says, just a dad sitting outside while his daughter's getting married. And it's just like, wow.
Heart-wrenching, right? Like the most important moment in your daughter's life is getting married, and you're not able to be in
because you either didn't get caught up on tithing, you were drinking coffee.
Yeah, it's not worthy. That's the point. And there's a lot of rules that you have to abide by to be able to be worthy. Tithing's one, so you have to pay 10% of your income. 2 is like worthiness as far as morality goes. Worthiness also goes into whether you're wearing your garments every day, right? Because that was a temple question that you had,
right?
And you can lie. A lot of people lie through the temple questions, but that's
a very complicated issue if you're a believing member. And another thing, just by virtue of what we're talking about, just the idea of the church telling you that you're impure, that you've got an impurity. They sort of diagnose you with a disease because they have the cure for it.
Yeah.
And so whether that's a masturbation problem or a coffee problem or a not wearing your garments problem, or
there's a quote,
any number of things.
We all sin and fall short of glory. So again, you are labeled a sinner, and you can only need Christ to be able to atone for those sins. And it depends on the church, right? That church is what allows you to have the atonement that you need.
And when I hear bishops who've deconstructed, one of the things that they feel an intense loss of is their time.
Yeah.
I mean, the church takes our time. It takes our money. There's so much time away from our family. I remember when I was a young women's president, someone saying to me, I sacrificed all this time being a young women's president for years. And I'm so grateful that now you're stepping in to take my daughter, because I cared for all these girls while I was president at the expense of time with my own children. And so I am grateful now that you're able to pay that forward. But think about that.
Any leader from a bishop to a primary president to a Relief Society president to a young women's president to a young men's president, they all give a significant amount of their time, and they can never get that time back.
You can never get that time back.
I'm not saying that time wasn't worth or valuable, because there's probably a lot of kids. If you're a young women's president or a young men's president, there's probably kids that see and look up to you and feel like you're an example. And currently today, you have a number of young women that you still talk to and reach out to. So there is value in that, in what they're doing. I just want to make sure that it might not be the priority that you would have put onto it, meaning that your priority might have been more toward the family than
right
to others. So.
Yeah. And I found that there's some members of the church that are so nuanced and aware of these issues that they're like, no, I'm not going to take a scouting calling until my kid's in there.
Yeah.
And then at that point I will. No, I'm not going to take a young woman's calling until I have a daughter in there. And I want to, some people are really assertive that way with their callings. I was never that way. I always felt like if the bishop called me to something, that it was my duty to serve faithfully. And I was confident that he was receiving the inspiration that I needed to. Am I grateful for the time that I spent as a young women's leader? Absolutely. I'm still in contact. Many of those girls are deconstructing. So I'm super grateful that I had that time with them. But it's complicated because that was also time away from my own family.
And I feel like because I was in ward council and bishopric for such a long time, that I miss critical times with some of my kids. I have our middle son, which I was trying to grow my career or enhance my career. On top of that, being in bishopric at that moment in time too, I feel like I missed out on a lot of my middle son's life because I was so heads down in both church and work. So.
Right. Yeah. And I think once we come to this realization, the first part of the rescue is, to me, just identifying the harm and saying, I did not deserve that. Mm-hmm. That was not right. And I did not deserve that.
So the other thing I think produces harm that we haven't talked about is the brainwashing. You're being taught these principles or certain doctrine within the church that you find out later on that none of it was really real. And so you have to rip that indoctrination out, or I guess you could still carry it on after this life or after you deconstruct, but what you're going to find out is it's built upon a false platform. So
it's built on a sandy foundation,
as they would say.
Who built their house on the sand?
It's so funny because you're always talking about building their house on the sand and the rock. Well, you really built your house on the sand for
There
this.
are so many riddles inside the church. My friend said to me the other day, when I used to sit inside the temple and I would think to myself, I literally bought these signs and tokens for money.
Yeah.
I literally paid money to be here. She said, it's like a riddle.
Yeah.
And there's so many of them. The wise man built his house upon the stone. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. Like, you can flip basically every parable in the church, and it's just so amazing to me, almost just delicious. The fact that behavior is classic narcissist move.
Well,
they're going to accuse you of what they're doing. So the church has all these stories that vilify someone, but if you look closely enough, you'll see that it's actually them.
Well, and how everything stands is based upon their absolute truth. If that absolute truth goes, and all your decisions that you're making
are based on that,
are based upon that, like what I wear, what I eat, what I drink.
How about how I think?
Yeah. What I physically do, like intimacy with others, everything is controlled there. And people are comfortable with that because they believe it's true. But once it doesn't become true.
When that foundation crumbles, so does your identity.
Yeah, your identity, because you felt like you didn't have, you didn't have control of those decisions. Those decisions were made by someone else influencing you on that. And so that becomes very problematic because everything you've been doing for the past 45 years of your life was controlled. And now you want to get your life back. You want to have control of those decisions. But then when you're taking control of those decisions, what do you do? Like, how do you do? Like, you have to start figuring out like that whole process back. And that's part of the rescue that you're talking about.
Absolutely. So part of the process of making sense of all of this is creating, first of all, just conceptualizing what happened to you, like making sense of what happened to you. For me, this was a very complex, sort of messy process. And what I used in order to do this is the picture timeline. I took a picture for each year of my life and I put it on the ground across the floor. And I tried to come up with a picture for each year to represent each year of my life. And I was able to get pretty close. So I'm lucky that way. And I just left it there for a couple days and I just walked up and down and looked at these pictures to just try to make sense of when different things started. And I could see in the pictures, I could remember different things that I was thinking and different issues that were woven in, perfectionistic culture, eating disorders,
all your major
trips to the bishop's office.
All your major life decisions was attached to the church, right?
That was exactly what I found. All of my major life decisions were based on my indoctrination. And somehow it was tied to the hardships in my life. So if you've got a broken family, boom, we've got a plan for that. We've got eternal families. You're going to have to pay tithing and do this list of 300 things in order to achieve that. But we've got a resolution for that. So going through my timeline, I was able to just kind of make sense of how it all happened and to see where the church played a part. And it was a healing process.
I didn't put out pictures like you did, but I did go through it in my mind. Like you go through every critical decision in your life. You go, like the first thing I hit was mission. Like I gave up 2 years of my life to go talk about an illusion. And I had someone that reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm like someone I baptized. Say, hey, I'm good. I'm really good." And it was just great to get to know you out there, and I appreciate that very much. But I still do feel like that life decision, I wasted 2 years, even though I served other people, helped other people, met a bunch of these great people, and one of them we go out and have. It's a friend of ours that we go out and on weekends with. I still feel like I could have been doing something better with my time during that period.
Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it?
It is.
Feels very complicated. Another thing that I wonder if would be useful to you is journaling. I know you're not much of a journaler, but I think for other people, maybe just journaling it out. I don't think the pictures are necessary for everyone, but to write in a journal, just kind of what happened, timeline, start documenting it. And in this process, sometimes you'll start kind of remembering things. And I think it's just helpful for conceptualizing it. Just like create a timeline of your life, create an outline of like younger years, childhood, the years that you're preparing to go into like young women's or young men's, you're starting to pass the sacrament or whatever, and just get it all laid out. And I think it helps to see it that way. The other thing that you did was the amnesia game.
So you saying,
suggested that, and I liked it a lot.
So I asked a question, and I saw this on Instagram, where if I had amnesia, what would you tell me about my life?
I felt like that was a really powerful experience.
Yeah, walking through that, and especially walking through it till now, and that change that occurred once you deconstruct. And I think it's very good to hear what others see or think of you.
Yeah. It can also be kind of a cool way to view the circumstances of your life without going into the different emotion of it. Because there's really like, you could find hundreds of ways to tell one person's life story. And removing the emotion of it and just looking at, well, then you moved here, then you moved back, then you had this happen, then we met. It's kind of a nice experience just hearing your lifeline, your life timeline told in like a really objective way.
Yeah.
I will say that I really struggled with all of this identity rebuild until I had an experience with psilocybin. And that actually gave me a very similar experience to the amnesia timeline. And what I mean by that is that I was able to see my life. Of course, I went into it with that intention. So anytime you use psychedelics, I feel like you get kind of whatever your intention is out of it. So if you go into it from a recreational standpoint, you might just not get any, downloads or whatever. But if you go into it from the perspective of wanting to heal, you will most likely have insights. And some of them are so profound, it's hard for me to believe that they just came from my own brain. It feels like it's coming from like a greater source somewhere. And I don't know what it is. I can't really pretend to understand. I kind of wonder if mushrooms have a way of like absorbing the wisdom that's lived on the earth. But I saw some beautiful aspects of my life. And I even saw the most traumatic aspects of my life. And I saw, oh my gosh, that's why this happened. Like I'd never seen that before. It was like I was watching my life as an outsider, like almost like seeing it from just like the audience perspective. And it was just so interesting because I saw, oh wow, that's where that hustle for worthiness started. It started in that moment. And because all of this happened, I decided to make it my full-time job to be as worthy as possible. I like became committed to never being unworthy again and never running the risk of not having an eternal family.
So is it, would you say the psychedelics allow you to work through those blockages in your life?
Yeah, I think what it did is it exposed parts of my history that I hadn't seen before. And I've actually had three big psychedelic trips, and I spaced them far enough apart. The second one that I did that I probably wouldn't recommend doing unless you're working with like a life coach or a therapist was I did some inner child work, and I found like what I would call fragmented parts of myself that were like fractured in my early childhood and then just buried away. Stuff that I did not want to identify with. And part of this rescue process has been like retrieving those fractured little parts, kind of like these.
Is it because of the guilt and shame that you had, and that's the reason why you buried them?
No, I don't. Is it because of guilt and shame? No, I mean, I think just in the capacity of going to church every Sunday, like you just become really clear with the archetype that's acceptable in this tribe.
So
So I just think that immediately, without even needing to go into guilt, fear, shame, whatever, when you're part of an organization that has a very strong emphasis on conformity and they give you a very precise prescription for the archetype, this is what you need to be. Mm-hmm. You just naturally start to kind of dismiss parts of yourself. If it doesn't work, you got to dismiss it. And this could be, what could it be?
Well, I was going to say for me, it was going out and dancing and having fun. Like once we got married, it became real.
Like that doesn't fit anymore.
Yeah, that doesn't fit in Mormonism. Like going to a bar, that's not going to be appropriate, right?
You gotta bury that.
Yeah, you have to bury that. Or going out to a music festival with a lot of drugs and people around you just eat, live, and be merry, right? You can't do that. So you need to pull that away from you. And so that's one of the things I hid from me. Like when I felt like I was really fun, when we were first dating. And then once we got married, it was like, straight and narrow. I need to follow that hold to that rod and follow that path forward. And I found that I lost myself during that period of time. And I conformed, like you were talking about. I started conforming in a way that wasn't natural to who I was.
Yeah. Do you remember when we did the sound bowl night?
Yeah.
Okay, so we go to our neighbor's house. She's this amazing, she does Tibetan bowls. And I always call her a healer, but she's like, don't call me a healer. Anytime anyone heals, it's because they heal themselves. I think that's how a true healer is supposed to function. But she does this Tibetan bowl, sound bowl therapy. So we go over there and she does all this cool kind of witchy stuff. And you know how I feel about that. It's like, I have not adopted this as my new religion. I don't have the same intensity for this like spirituality as I did for Mormonism, but I think it's cool. I think it's fun to experiment with. And at this event, she asked us to write something on a piece of paper and then we were going to burn it. And so she said, just put something on a piece of paper that you want to release. And I just wrote purity culture. And it was so amazing. And I am sure this is just psychological, but it was so amazing what happened to me in the weeks and months following that. I was so much more comfortable in my body. Like, when have I ever stood in our room and just like danced in my underwear? Like,
Never.
Not till after that day, right?
Yeah.
And now that's like I feel finally comfortable in my body. Now, was there anything objectively that happened when I buried when I burned that little piece of paper? No, I don't think anything objectively happened. But in my mind, that was enough to just
Crack it open.
let go of that. Yeah. Just like, I don't need to let that rule me. And at the same time of getting rid of this harmful indoctrination of things like purity culture, I'm at the same time reviving these little fractured parts of me that have been buried away, that I've been embarrassed of. And it's kind of like an awkward unmasking process. And you're just getting to know all these little, it's just really an interesting experience. So shadow work is kind of one modality that you can use for this. There's a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford. That was my first introduction to shadow work. These were the insights that gave me the nudge toward deconstruction. They opened an awareness.
But it sounds like they were also used to rescue you later on as you became more aware of yourself and those hidden parts of you, and you were able to bring them forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So whether it's journaling or shadow work or doing something with psychedelics, or having a trusted person narrate your timeline as if you had amnesia. Yeah. I think those are really super. I think it all works, and they all try them all, try none of them. I mean, I think that they can be really helpful they were helpful for me.
I found myself with a lot of religious trauma. I felt coming through the deconstruction where I was, and you know this, I felt like I was drowning for about a year and a half, and enough to where I started to reach to you, but you were drowning too. So we couldn't really help and buoy each other up during that period of time. And so one important tool for me was community. Like TikTok was becoming something that was very important to me at the very beginning of deconstruction. And part of it is I just wanted to hear from people who were going through something similar as I was. And so I would pop on lives. Talk to people on lives, because I just wanted to feel like I wasn't alone anymore. And there was a number of lives. It went from lives into Marco Polo, where some of the TikTok creators had a Marco Polo group, and we all shared our experience ourselves. That was very stabilizing for me. Talking with other individuals going through similar situations, feeling like they were shunned by their family, or feeling like they were struggling with their identity, and just talking to them based upon, where they are at that point in time in their deconstruction. And so I felt heard for the first time. Like when you leave the church, most of your Mormon friends will not sit with you and say, hey, what's going on?
Nobody even says why.
No, they just, matter of fact, I remember going to the church one time to pick up our son because he was in the youth activity. They were playing dodgeball, and I saw the stake president, and I walked by, and he acted like everything was great. And I'm like, you know that I'm going through a major faith crisis, and you like totally don't sit with me and say, hey, Jamie, how are you doing? How are you feeling at this time?
It's
What's
hard.
going on?
People don't know how to handle it.
And
I think it's so tough.
Is members don't know how to handle this situation, and that's the reason why I think Bridges is so good for them. If they
the book
truly,
Bridges by David Osler.
Yeah, if they truly read that, they might be able to help. But because you don't have that support, you feel alone. And when you feel alone, you're just trying to figure out any way to be able to not feel alone anymore. And you're not getting the support from your member friends. And for me, I wasn't necessarily getting a lot of support from you because you were going through it. And so that Marco Polo community became like critical for me to start understanding that I'm not alone in this journey. Other people are going through it, and then hearing the tools that they were using to get themselves, I'm going to call it well again, or get them through the religious trauma they were going through. I had 2 or 3 Marco Polo groups, maybe 4 Marco Polo groups that I was in, bouncing back and forth and talking with different people, and it became very cathartic, and then ultimately I think bounced me out. Then we started doing things outside of the Marco Polo groups, right? We had one group that we went to Las Vegas with. We had another group that we went to Cancun with. And like after having that support, I felt like I was able to grab onto something. I was able to stabilize myself in that water and figure out, no, I do really have a stable platform, and I just need to build from that platform.
There's also a number of people that have started communities. So Thrive is one of them. And I think Thrive was a huge component for us with what you're talking about in terms of finding community.
Yeah.
So we went to our first Thrive event, and then we ended up getting really close to a couple people that we're still really close to.
Yeah.
And we kind of branched into like
other groups.
Yeah,
from that.
you meet people through there. And so I recommend going to those big events if they're in your area. Thrive has meetup groups. Anyone can start one.
Yeah.
And it's just a free community just to participate in. There are some events that they do where they'll like sell tickets at a very minimal price just to pay for the venue. But it's collaborative. They're so fun. Sometimes they'll have speakers. They'll have like their Thrive Unite event in different cities where you can go and listen to people talk about their experiences and teach. And so there's Thrive. Then there's also the Faith Journey Meetups group they also do events. And I want to say that the Girls Camp podcast also did. And
I think they're doing some retreats too.
Yeah. But what's fun to see with these newer groups, these younger groups coming through, is that now there's something that really the Gen Zs can identify with.
And I would and you don't even have to do the groups too. You could get onto TikTok and then make connections on TikTok, DM people, and start developing friendships, figure out people around you. I do think if you're struggling in this area and you feel like you need support in this area, there is a lot of support in the ex-Mormon community, but you have to find the right people for you.
Yeah.
Right? Not everybody will be, like you called it sacred circle, your sacred circle. You know, you need to develop that sacred circle that fits for you.
You know, the other thing that I think is a pretty common theme in the ex-Mormon community is that you find out someone from your old stake deconstructed or your old ward deconstructed, and you start connecting with them. And it's so funny because some of my closest friends were people that like, we were in the same ward together 26 years ago when we were like young, newly married. We didn't really have that much in common. And now we're best friends because we went through this deconstruction. And so now we're like besties. We got a number of besties, but you know,
trauma bonding, right? Is that
trauma bonding. Yeah. You know, there really is something on that. We need to have a whole episode on community. But what I want to say, as far as the rescue goes, community is such an important element for just lightening up this process because it can get intense.
It can. It can. And you need to bounce things off of people. And if you don't have people around you that you can bounce things off of,
laugh at.
yeah, it can be lonely and difficult. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a fun experience making connections with people. And there's so many online spaces. I mentioned in one of our last episodes, Bumble BFF is another place that you can meet people. Groups on Facebook, Marco Polo groups, showing up to one of those Thrive events or a Girls Camp podcast event or a Faith Journey meetups event. Like those are all really great ways to just connect with people.
Yeah.
And you can start your own if you want. But yeah, so I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next area of healing and rescue for you has been health and wellness.
Oh, yes.
Getting back in touch with your body.
Yeah. Like you lose your body. You're like
disconnected from your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Lose control, disconnect, both. Yeah. Because I focused on the celestial kingdom and the future, I felt like, hey, like what I wear didn't really matter. Exercise really didn't matter because I was continuing to look in the future in the celestial kingdom. As I deconstructed that and realized like every moment that I have is precious, I also looked at my body and said, hey, I really want to be healthy. I want to, part of that too was because I was in such a funk in my mind. I needed to figure out other ways to feel better, lifting weights, going into a sauna, hiking, cardio type of activities. And then on top.
And then you kind of just start to feel better and you're like, wow, I really actually like this caring for the vessel concept.
Caring for myself.
Looking back on my experience in the church, I feel like there was a deliberate effort to disconnect us from our body. Mm-hmm. You've got a wedge between you and your body, basically, in terms of purity,
sex,
what you're allowed to do with your body. You're even told this isn't your body. This is God's.
Well, look in one of the YouTube comments.
Even the comments.
Yeah, someone was saying, "What do you mean? God, it's God's body. It's God's. God gave it to you. This is my body. I can choose what I want to do with my body."
I love it. Well, one of the exercises that we discovered was sensory awareness. And that was so big for you in getting in touch with your anxiety. And I would say that this is even a great tool to use in your rescue process, which is just that when you're feeling anxiety, you sit for a minute, and whether it's anxiety or fear, or you're having some kind of panic, and you just visualize where
the meditation,
where that feeling is coming in your body, and you focus on it. And then you try to give it like a description. So like if that anxiety in your body had a description, what would it look like? Well, it would be like a big metal ball, like taking up space in my abdomen. This, like, I remember shame when I was a kid. It felt like I had a softball stuck in my throat. Like that's what shame felt like to me as a little girl. And identifying it through the sensory awareness, it helps you, number one, it helps you get through it in the moment. It helps you reconnect to your body. And then in future events where you're feeling that dysregulation, you can identify where it's coming up. Oh, there it is.
So what I would recommend on this is that therapy and life coaching can be very helpful during this process. If you're starting to feel feelings that you've never felt before because you hid them or masked them in the past, and now they're coming open because you're part of this process, you might not be able to work through some of this yourself. Mm-hmm. And so having a therapist help work through it, through the trauma, I think is very good. I never leveraged a therapist, but I've known a number of people who did, and it's been very helpful for them to continue getting through the religious trauma.
Yeah, there's two exercises that I feel are incredibly important, whether it's therapy or life coaching. One is sensory awareness, and the other one is integration, doing integration exercises where you're taking two conflicting parts of yourself and merging them together. And it's kind of part of that fractured self, rescuing the fractured self. So the last one that we're going to talk about today is probably the most important one, I think, and that is the element of incorporating fun. And part of this is getting back in touch with who you were as a kid. What were the things that you liked to do as a kid? Where were you when you had free time? Were you outside? Were you writing? Were you reading? Like, were you dancing? Were you playing sports? What were the things that you were doing? And start exploring in those areas. Sign up for a class. Get tickets to go out dancing. Go to a club. It's the most uncomfortable thing you've ever done if you've never done it before. Tequila helps.
Yeah, we have a friend that we kind of pull with us sometimes.
Literally one shot of tequila can make such a big difference going out dancing for the first time.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to say you have to incorporate alcohol, but I think that play is way underestimated.
Do you think that within the church, what do you think is the issue within the church where you don't have fun?
I don't know, but an interesting thing happened recently. Someone posted a picture of their Easter party, and it was like the Easter breakfast. And one of our friends who has also deconstructed commented on it, and she said, "Wow, that is the most miserable looking group of people." But then I was like, oh, she's right.
None of them are smiling.
They just all looked miserable. And I'm like, did I ever enjoy an Easter breakfast? I don't know. There's just so much obligation. What if you...
Did it come with anxiety going to an Easter?
Oh my God. Yeah. I have a friend, we have a friend who hosts every year, like a turn of the season. What is it? During Easter time, she'll do like this, like...
What's the celebration during Easter?
I think it's a pagan celebration.
Yeah, I forget, but she does that. So
yeah, and the reason I mention it is because going to something like that that's totally on your terms and you don't feel this obligation to the word family. I mean, again, there's beauty in that. I know you can defend the word Easter party all you want. I'm sure people are going to be pissed about that in the comments. But all I'm saying is choose your fun, choose your joy.
What resonates with you? If you love music, I used to go to Lollapalooza. Like I went to a bunch of concerts when I was in high school. Doing concerts now today is so fun for me, and it allows me to relax and let go and just be who I am in those moments. I used to love back when I was younger. I used to love athletic opportunities, and so hiking would be something I do, or going to the beach. The beach provides a lot of peace for me, and so guess what we do on weekends? We drive to the beach and drive and walk on the beach during that. And so we do things that we didn't do as much as when we were in the church.
Here's, I think, the biggest resistance that people have to play is that when you're depressed, it's the last thing you want to do. Yeah. And unfortunately, when you have a faith crisis, very often people will slip into kind of a depression. And I don't know if it's probably a lot of it is circumstantial, but just like you've kind of adopt this sort of apathy for life. And so you really do have to activate your self-care muscle. That's
the right.
Yeah. Like if you had yourself moving into your house for a little while, like this gal's traumatized because she just lost her entire identity. It all went flushing down the toilets with the church's truth claims. And now what does she need to do to heal? What does that person need to do to heal?
Yeah. And it could be different for everybody. It could be just reading a book. Like I never got to read. I used to love reading. I want to read now.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I love movies and I stopped going to movies. I want to go to movies. Like, do things that you used to love doing and start like revisiting those experiences.
Yeah. And I would say too, even to like the neurodivergent crowd, a lot of people will discover that they're neurodivergent in the process of unmasking. Mm-hmm. And there's also groups that get together that are like the neurodivergent groups, and there's something for everyone.
Once I got to a place where I felt like I could start rebuilding myself, I started creating a bucket list of things. Like one of my bucket lists I haven't done yet is I really want to go to Burning Man. Burning Man is one of those places that I've wanted to go and since I was in high school. And what I want to do is I want to take all my missionary clothes and burn them in the temple.
They have a burning ritual,
Yeah, they
right?
have a burning ritual.
Man.
Yeah. And so I, in my mind, I have a plan to take I have a mission box, and I'll probably burn a few things in that mission box, more for a release as part of that. But I have a bucket list. Burning Man is one of those items on my bucket list.
Yeah. I would add that to our list of on the rescue list, actually making a bucket list.
Yeah.
Make a bucket list for yourself. What are the things that you want to do? What are the things that you want to explore?
Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to add to today's episode?
No, I think you covered it. This is the fun part.
Yeah.
To me, like the deconstruction and tearing things down is hard. The identity crisis is hard. The fun stuff is starting to rebuild things back and doing things that you didn't do before or did do before that you weren't doing anymore. It's okay to be selfish during this period of time. When I say selfish, to
prioritize your own self-care.
Because in the church, you've been told not to prioritize. You need to help serve other people. Prioritize yourself during this period of time.
Yeah, one thing that I wrote down is that you kind of have to be your own advocate. You really do have to kind of advocate for yourself. This may mean setting down new boundaries with your
significant other or your friends or your family, and that might be really hard. I like that idea because I think part of the rescue is setting boundaries. Mm-hmm. You have to set healthy boundaries. And that might be, for some people, disconnecting from anything that's Mormonism. If that continues to pull you in that spiral, you might have to disconnect from friends and family until you get yourself healthy.
And you don't always have to make your boundary known. I think that's another thing that was important for me to learn, that a boundary is for yourself. It's not something that another person initiates. It's something that you control. And you can set a part-way boundary. You can say, like, I see this person this many times a year.
Yeah.
And
you don't need to tell them about it.
And
right?
I don't mention this or this. Yeah, they may never know.
Yeah.
I think when we think of boundaries, sometimes we jump immediately to no contact. And I think there's a lot that you can do in the healing space without having to go no contact. If you need to go no contact, that's like no shade to that situation. There are a lot of people that need to go no contact. But if it's a situation that you can handle, setting a boundary that just has to do with how often you see the person, what kinds of communication you're willing to have with them. And you may have to say, not really willing to talk about church doctrine.
And you could also see this with other ex-Mormons. If some ex-Mormons pull you into a space that you're uncomfortable with, or you feel like pulls you back down into, your identity crisis or triggers some emotions, you can set a boundary there. And not necessarily tell them, or you can tell them one or the other. It's okay to set boundaries with all different people during this period of time, so you can heal to a point to where you might not need it anymore.
Yeah. But getting in touch with yourself, getting back in touch with your body, I think that's such a big thing, because then you're going to start to recognize, I really feel uneasy when I'm with this person. Yeah. Why is that?
Take control. Take control of yourself.
All right. Well, you guys, thank you so much for joining us on this episode today. If there have been elements that have been very important to your own healing, we would love to hear what they are. So please tell us in the comments, what was part of your rescue? Have you gone through a rescue process?
Everybody's rebuilding process is different.
Yeah.
None of us will be the same. What Alicia did to rebuild was very different than what I did to rebuild. So we'd love to hear what other people did to rebuild their own, because there is not one right way here.
I agree so much. And I think everything changes like by the minute sometimes.
Yeah.
Your interest, your exploration.
You can do it.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.